Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. It's your boy D Black, back with another Raw review. Alrighty, Raw tonight. It wasn't a bad show, it wasn't a decent show. You would expect more after WrestleMania that it would have been, a good one. It was mid-average, I guess. But anyway, we started out with FEMI coming out and everything. He gets the crowd, in. Everybody's loving him and stuff like that. And then once he gets on the mic, he said the ruler has arrived, and he mic drops, and that's it. You would have thought that he would have said more, but he didn't. Maybe next week. We'll see. Then we get a little thing about Oscar, saying about Io Sky and talking about Rhea Ripley and Io Sky and how Io, used to be family and now she's not family because she went with, Rhea, and now that Rhea is a champion and everything, Oscar is saying that, Io is nothing right now and stuff. And then Kyrie gets in, Kyrie tells him, hey, because they get ready to have a match with Io Sky and Rhea Ripley that they beat them before, they'll beat them again. Then we get the match with Io Sky, um, Rhea Ripley, and the Kabuki Warriors and stuff. Match was okay, went back and forth and stuff like that. And eventually, Io gets the riptide on Kyrie, and then they tag, and then over the moonsaw, and EO pins Kyrie Sane. And Rhea Ripley and EO win the match. Then we get Penta backstage, with Adam Pierce, and Adam Pierce is telling Penta, congratulating him. The Javon Evans, comes up, basically said that, he wants a title. He's looking at a title match because he should have been, he should have won the ladder match and everything. And then we get introduced to Ethan Page, who is, from NXT. Now he's on the roster and stuff. And then Ethan Page is saying that he wanted a title shot too. So it was put together from Adam Pierce that Ethan Page and Javon Evans will meet each other later on tonight, in the match. Then we get CM Punk, coming out saying that, he's lost some people in his life and everything that, meant something to him, and that, he had their names on the jacket, when he wrestled at WrestleMania and stuff from WrestleMania 2 and stuff. The jacket, he had the names, of the people that, he lost and stuff like that, and then he says that, even though he lost and everything to Roman Reigns, that, he's always going to be able, he's always going to stay ready because you never know when an opportunity might fall out the sky. Then Cody Rhodes comes out and everything, and then Cody's eye looks real bad. That's all I can say. Just looking at that eye, just looked real, real bad. You know. And then Punk tells Cody that he was about to leave, and Cody tells him, they didn't have to leave and everything. You know. And then Cody starts kind of feeling into himself and saying that he feels like, he's a loser, and then CM Punk, tells him that, he's not a loser. Even though um, he lost to Roman Reigns, that he, feels okay. And then he asked Cody, did he think that, he was going to be freaking out and stuff like that? And then Cody, tells him that, yeah, he, said that he thought that he would be freaking out and stuff like that. And then Cody goes into himself, and Cody says that, he feels like he's a loser. And then Punk tells Cody that he's not a loser and everything. He's feeling that way because he fought against his best friend, a mentor, a legend and everything, and he told him that he's not a loser, and stuff, to get, kind of more of a grip of himself like that and everything. And he says that, like him, even though he lost to Roman Reigns, he said that, hey, look, he's always going to be on, top. He's always going to be, number one. Then he said that he's always going to be ready. He's going to say, he's going to stay ready because you never know when the opportunity might, fall out of the sky And then as he's leaving the ring, Cody looks at him and Cody says, "Just say win." And stuff. Then you get a little promo with Finn Balor talking about JD McDonagh and stuff like that. That he's gonna get, even with JD McDonagh and stuff like that because of the match that, before that they had and everything. Even though as the Demon he beat Dom, so that's cool. But so now he said he's gonna take apart, the Judgment Day, and he's gonna go ahead and take out JD McDonagh. Then we get the match with Ethan Page and Javon Evans. The match was okay. The match was going good. It was working out pretty well and everything. And then all of a sudden, we have a doggone Rusev sighting. Rusev comes out, you know, um, and everything. Tries to interfere. Javon Evans gets back in the ring. He gets got, you know, by Ethan Page. And Ethan Page, wins the match and everything. The Rusev comes in and he jumps on Javon Evans and he starts beating him up. And then Penta comes out, and then Penta, starts getting up on Rusev. And then as Penta's about ready to get into a frog splash of some sort, Ethan Page knocks him off the turnbuckle and stuff, and Rusev gets Penta, beats him up, and Ethan Page is looking, then Accolade, he gets him, and stuff, and then Penta's a mess. He destroys Penta. Then we get Liv Morgan and everything saying that she's the greatest, of all times, that, she needs to thank the Judgment Day for always being there for her and stuff like that, being by her side and stuff like that. And then she, also gives thanks to Stephanie Valkyrie, saying that, they beat the hell out of each other. And it reminded her of who she is. And it reminds her for being, you know, the most talented woman in the WWE, saying that this is her ring, her division, this is her show, and this is her, world championship. And then out comes Ruka, you know, um, and the Ruka said that she's been actually watching Liv, you know, and she tells Liv that, that she knows that she's on top of the division and everything. And then Liv kind of like gives a kind of like smart reaction. She tells Soruka that how dare her come out and interrupt her while she's having her celebration with her championship, and then with the her family, the Judgment Day. And then Liv tells Soruka that she appreciates her nice comments, and then says to Soul, even though it was nice, but she's got something to say to her that possibly nice, something that's nice, and she could possibly say something to her nice, and then tells her that um, she's not her, she's not Liv, and stuff like that, you know. And as she says that, then out comes Adam Pearce, and Adam Pearce is asking the people, "Hey, do they want to see them fight and everything?" The people say yes, and then we get a match with Ruka and Liv Morgan. The match was going good; it was doing fine and everything and stuff like that. And then we get an involvement, with Zarya. Zarya and Ruka have a match, on Tuesday, on NXT, in this last woman standing match and stuff like that. So she gets involved in the match um, and everything. And then Soruka is put back in the ring. Actually, Soruka jumps back in the ring before the 10 count. Liv gets the Oblivion on her and wins the match. There were some other exciting things that happened. Liv tried to do an Oblivion on Soruka kind of, did a flip out of it and stuff like that. That was pretty good. But eventually she got caught with the Oblivion again and everything, and Liv Morgan, wins the match and stuff. And then at that time, Stephanie Valkyria comes out, and her and Liv Morgan, steer each other down. Then we got a little film promo, about Brock Lesnar and everything. And, all I can say is that Brock brought us a lot of good matches and stuff like that. He destroyed a lot of good people that, we like, as far as like Roman Reigns. His last destruction was against John Cena. I mean, he destroyed John Cena and stuff. But it is what it is. Brock Lesnar is great. He's the GOAT. He's the beast in carnage and stuff like that. So we give Brock, his praises and everything, and um, wish the best for him and his endeavors. And then the Vision came out with Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman saying that WrestleMania, brings a lot of unexpected, things that happen, especially about the fact with Brock Lesnar losing and everything and stuff. And then he kind of gets a little bit emotional talking about, when the WWE comes on in their programs, they have the Then, Now, Forever, and Together video. So he's telling them, to take Brock Lesnar out of the now and put his face in the forever, because he will never be forgotten and everything. And that's where he is. Everybody should respect, Brock Lesnar, for that. And he gives his props to him and everything and stuff like that. And then Logan Paul gets on the mic and he, says that the Usos in LA Knight, stole, the win against him at WrestleMania, and he blamed I Show Speed, um, for them losing and stuff. And it said, I Show Speed went home, with his fist, with Logan Paul's fist inside of his face and stuff like that. And then Paul Heyman, he ends up thanking, Gunther for coming out and doing what he did, beating Seth Rollins, but he had help. Braun Breaker came out and speared him and stuff like that. But anyway, he said that Paul Heyman told Gunther, that whenever he's ready, for the favor and everything, just let him know, and he would take care of that, anytime and stuff. And then he introduces Braun Breaker, and then Braun Breaker comes out, and Braun Breaker said that a year ago, um, he became, the leader of the Vision, which is crazy because Seth Rollins is the one that got the Vision together and everything. And, and that's a whole way back story there with that, as far as the screw over, with CM Punk and Roman Reigns about that and everything. So Braun Breaker is not the one who got the Vision started. It was Seth Rollins who got the Vision started and stuff like that, you know. And then he says, Braun Breaker says that he's coming after, Seth Rollins, and Seth Rollins, comes out and he attacks the Vision with a chair and stuff, starts beating him down. Then Austin Theory, stops Seth Rollins and everything. So they started, beating Seth Rollins down and everything. I mean, it was beating his butt. And then out come the Street Profits. I'm back. I'm glad that they're back. So the Street Profits are back and everything. They beat the Vision back, stage and everything like that. And then Braun Breaker comes, he hits Seth Rollins with a spear, beats him down and everything. Then he hits him with another spear and stuff. And then he tells Seth Rollins that, he's coming after him and everything. He's going to destroy him. He's going to ruin him and everything. And he's going to take everything from him. Then we got the match with Finn Balor, and JD McDonagh. Mm, the match was okay and stuff, he did say that he was going to, going to beat McDonagh and everything. So the fight was okay and stuff, JD McDonagh, I mean, Finn Balor hits JD McDonagh, with the coup de grace. And then after that, Dominic comes in, he jumps on Finn Balor, after the match is over with. And then Finn gets the match, get that turned around. He starts beating up on Dom and everything. He kicks him into the turnbuckle, and then as he climbs the rope to get ready to do a coup de grace and everything, JD McDonagh, pulls him out the ring and pulls him out of harm's way. Then we got Kathy, Kelly, and doggone Gunther talking, and Gunther says that um, that he feels fantastic because Kathy asked him how he feel about the match he had with Seth Rollins. He said he feels fantastic that he beat Seth Rollins and everything. Then he says that that Paul Heyman owes him a favor. That's the only thing. He said there's no ties between Gunther and Paul Heyman. He said there's no ties between them. He said the only thing that matters to him is that Paul Heyman you know, when he's ready for his favor, that he'll give it to him and stuff like that. And then he said that he promised the people, and he tells everybody there to get comfortable because he will be wearing the championship around his waist soon. Then LA Knight comes out, and then LA Knight gets in Gunther's face and stuff like that. And he says that they're both winners at WrestleMania. That because Gunther beat Seth Rollins, and then Usos and LA Knight beat the Vision. And I Show Speed and everything and stuff. Basically, more or less, LA Knight said that he is also looking for the title, looking for a title shot and stuff like that. And at WrestleMania, since they were both wrestlers, and he said how Gunther got there and everything, and then it makes him go down and say that Gunther is one of the people and he lost. And he said that the L stands for you know is short of an A, and then it's short of a night, and and that becomes the three letters, LA Night. And he says LA Night, yeah. So eventually LA Knight and Gunther are going to be having a match together and stuff like that. So, but anyway, we get Rio and Io Sky. They're saying goodbye. Going their separate ways. Because Rhea now she has to go to SmackDown because she is the champion over there and stuff. So, as she's walking, then Liv, tells her that she will see her around. And Rhea says to Liv that she looks forward to it. And then we got Roman Reigns, coming out and everything, and he asked the Usos to come out with him, and he says, that he's going to, he was going to talk, about, what happened last night, how he beat CM Punk, about winning the title and stuff like that, but he said that's not what he's going to do. He told the Usos that he missed them, that they were, joint union when they were together as the bloodline and stuff like that, and that's what he likes and stuff. And he told Jay Uso, he got people coming at him, disrespecting him and stuff. Like Cameron with that situation and stuff. That happened. It's all over the internet and YouTube and stuff like that with Cameron and Jay Uso. And then Jay's been on other podcasts and stuff like that talking about that situation and everything. And then, Roman tells him, hey, don't join him, like as for the tribal chief. He said, join him, as fact as for family and get them together as family and stuff. And then Jimmy, takes the mic. He said they, talked for both him and Jay, and basically he says, yeah, still stand, together with them and stuff like that, because other people are the two and they're the ones and stuff. And then Jacob Fatu comes out you know. And then Roman tells him, that he hasn't seen him, in a long time for a while. And then, he says, "Are you out for the family, or you out, for his title?" And then Jacob Fatu said that, he needs that title, so he's there for the title and stuff. And basically challenges Roman Reigns, to a match, at Backlash, you know. So that's how that went. And then Roman tells Jacob, you know, that he can't beat him and stuff. He can't handle the burden, as a champion and stuff. He can't handle, all that stuff and everything. And he said, Jacob can't beat him and can he handle the burden of saying that he acknowledges Roman Reigns as a tribal chief, and then says that it gets tight at the top of the mountain and everything and stuff like that, because it is a tough place to be at the top as a champion, because you got everybody from which direction coming at you. um, and then he says he will give Jacob um, a week to make a decision of what he's going to do, as far as does he want to join the family or does he want to wrestle Roman, whether he says yes or no and everything. He says to Jacob, that he's not sure, if Jacob is ready, for that, for the title or being at that top of the food chain, say, and everything. And then says that he would get with Jacob next week, on Raw, and everything. And he says, I'll see you later. See you next week, little cuz. And then they leave the ring, and that is the show. So, like I said, this Raw was okay. I mean, it wasn't great. I mean, you would have thought more. So, yeah, it wasn't a good Raw tonight. But anyway, please don't forget to subscribe, like, share, leave a comment. Let me know how you're feeling, if you agree or disagree, and everything. I know it seems like I'm a little bit all over the place, but my internet is acting real retarded, so I'm trying to get something out, something done. But anyway, thank you for watching. God bless. Deuces, and I'll see you on the next video. Thank you.